Good afternoon. It's great to see you all here, and we welcome those that are online as well. So it's great to see everybody here. I reckon we've probably got a record for the most number of blazers, different blazers in any one room. My name is Jim Lowe, and I'm your MC this afternoon. Just a few housekeeping matters. If you need the facilities, just through the door there. Please turn off your mobile phone. Fourth drinks are on you for anyone that goes off. There's a memorial book on the table at the front door, so please take the opportunity to sign that and write some comments about your time and thoughts of Brian. So to start official proceedings, I welcome Gina Peel, President of Mercantile Rowing Club.
Thanks, Jim, and welcome all of you to Mercantile Rowing Club. We have guests from Melbourne, interstate, overseas, and of course online. Brian's association with Mercantile Rowing Club and rowing spans many decades. He's often been described as a journeyman, being a highly respected and long-serving athlete and an exceptional coach who successfully coached rowers throughout the world, whilst being able to develop young rowers at both club, school, and at an elite level. He held prominent coaching positions in Canada, Denmark, South Korea, and Australia. His rowing record was outstanding, although I sat with my dad yesterday, and David Douglas, who reminded me that whilst he had an amazing King's Cup record, it took him to move to Melbourne and Victoria to win one. My memory of Brian goes back many, many decades to 1980. I was 8 years old. When Dad made a comeback to rowing, we lived in a place called Woodstock, and I think many of you today may have very fond memories of your times at Woodstock. Brian was a regular visitor and often accompanied our family on a Saturday supporting the Findon Hump Club. I don't think hunting is a thing anymore, but it certainly was in those days. Brian would come along with Dad and the three young kids, my sister, my brother and I, where we drove across the countryside, and it feels like a lifetime ago, where we watched the hunt, cross the roads, over jumps, to chase the scent of a fox. And those who were there with us will have great memories of these fun adventures with the Findon Hunt Club. But my association with Brian goes full circle. As I grew up, I also rowed, and I was on the Australian rowing teams with Brian as the head coach from 1997 to 2000, where in 2000 he coached the men's 8 to a silver medal. I believe there are athletes from that crew here today who I've also seen. Brian was admired and respected by those around him. Earlier this year, here at Mercantile, we named a boat after him in recognition of his service to the club and to rowing. At Mercantile Rowing Club, his contribution will not be forgotten. Thank you for being here.
On finishing schooling at Prince Alfred. Immediately, is that better? Yep. Immediately on finishing his schooling at Prince Alfred College in Adelaide, he gained selection in the South Australian King's Cup crew in 1966 at the age of 18, rowing in the 2-seat. Some 9 years later, 8 King's Cup, he became a Victorian. I now invite Kerry Gelbart to come up here and tell us how this happened and his personal and very close relationships with Brian.
Thanks, Jim. Good evening. Good evening. Is that coming through? Yeah. 1974 was mentioned. I would just like to go back to Prince Alfred College because he was captain of boats both in 5th and 6th grade there, form there. So that's a feather in his cap to start with. I knew Brian early on in 1960s in various regattas and intervarsities, but only as an opposition crew member. We didn't have very much to do until he actually came over here in 1974. But when he did arrive here, he was in a burgundy red MGB, which was a very nice way to go from one state to another. And he had been coached by Roger Moore at one stage in Adelaide for a short period of time. So when he came here, Monash was also being coached at the time by Roger Moore. So in that instance, it was obvious that he should sort of join our crews over here, which was very good. The other aspects of Monash was that, as I say, Roger Moore, David Bishop had come across as well 3 years earlier, prior to that. So our club at that stage was about 11 to 12 people in total, and Brian moved in very comfortably. So we'd also had the basis of the King's Cup crew win in Perth in 1971, where Brian and the Adelaide crew were in front all the way until the last little bit, and that was often the case with Adelaide. They had very good crews that could go very fast, and they were, looked extremely good, but they didn't quite have enough people on the average to get there, carry it all the way through. What have I missed? Ah, who's that? Who's that? So you're putting me off my commentary. Anyway, Brian didn't hold that against us over here. Didn't hold a grudge, and he and I took a house, a 5-room house over in Toorak, a corner of Toorak and Como Avenue. Now, I'm going to be a bit more Melbourne-centric in my comments, and also a little more of a lived experience, if you like, in the areas that I cover. So we moved into this wonderful 5-bedroom house. We had 3 lovely ladies join us. One was Virginia Scott Douglas, the other one was Julie Taylor, and the third one was Julie Bagshaw from Narracourt, where Brian spent some time in Narracourt when he was working for Elders, and also played football there. So we had a wonderful household for several years there, and we were very fortunate that the girls, Julie Taylor in particular, was a cordon bleu chef. So we on occasions and reasonably frequently enjoyed wonderful meals there later in the evening, which they would prepare and wait for us to return to give us a wonderful meal. On other days, we used to go down to the Cricketers Arms Hotel in Punt Road, down near Richmond Station, a small hotel down there. And Chris, the barman, or the owner of the place there, used to keep steak and salad available for us after hours, a bit after 8:30, which was very good. And while we were there, we were in the lounge bar. Out the front was a terrible noise a couple of times a week, and that was men at work, it turned out later, who were doing their practicing many years prior to the America's Cup. So we had our food arrangements very well covered. After that, Brian and David used to be at our home over in Ivanhoe on frequent occasions when time allowed. At one stage, Brian had moved to work for General Motors Holden. And he had a white Monaro V8 GT, etc., as his personal car. Well, at one stage, my mother brokered a deal with Brian and said, I would like to borrow your car and I'll lend you our old white Mercedes because I've got friends coming from the United Kingdom over here searching for butterflies. They're butterfly aficionados. Brian said, yes, no problem. So Mum, who was in her 60s at that stage, with this great big V8, towing a caravan around Victoria for 2 weeks, and Brian had no qualms whatsoever with good faith in a woman in her 60s. So that was a strong point from our family's point of view. After that, Brian and David both ended up with Melbourne Grammar activities, the cruise, and ended up in Melbourne Grammar as housemasters. So again, they had a good spread of involvement across the board in crews and schools. About that time, I had just purchased my first house, and I worked with the National Bank. So I was able to talk both of them into buying their first homes, which I think they thought I must have been a guru, because they said they wouldn't have done it otherwise. So we really enjoyed that aspect. When Brian actually went across to Vancouver Island to Canada the first time, he left fairly quickly. He didn't have a lot of opportunity to do things. So he asked me if I'd prepare his house and sell it for him. So that was very easy way for Brian to not have any involvement. So I did that, and that was good. I then went across to Vancouver Island and saw him over there, and that was a lot of fun too. So we're into the 70s now, and later 70s. I also then caught up with him in 1988 in Korea, because I was across there for 3 months doing a relief for the branch general manager. And Brian was several, 20, 30, 40 kilometres out of town, and he lost about 20 kilos at the time he was there, which was only 3 or 4 months, because he hated kimchi. And as I said, I was there about 4 months doing this relief just before the '88 Olympics, and Brian and come into Itaewon, catch up with me every 8 or 10 days, and we go down to the American hamburger place, and that was the only thing that saved him, I think, during the entire period that he was there. So that's the 1988. In 1983 was the America's Cup. Now, I happened to be working in Hong Kong at the time, and I was on vacation down in Australia with 5 other people, and we were out at Birdsville Track just after the Birdsville races. We weren't at the Birdsville races, but we were there for the America's Cup. We came outside at 6:15 in the morning and found a utility there that you could just reach in and turn on the radio. It was those old style ones with no keys required. And we listened to the America's Cup the last 45 minutes or so on the radio, which was, quite remarkable. Our pilot, a small plane, 5 of us, our pilot was Chris Shearer from the agricultural family in Adelaide, and he was also a National Bank person. And his father was godfather to Brian, and Brian's father, Max, was godfather to Chris. So that was a lovely circumstance during the '83 America's Cup. So we move on from there towards the 2000s, and Brian would have been rowing for 25 years probably by the year 2000, and mostly rowing but some coaching. And then after 2000 he was mostly coaching and not rowing at all, apart from a couple of anniversary type paddles. It was in the year 2000, the Sydney Olympics, around that time that a specially engineered blind date was put together. It happened to be Suzie Coughlin here. And they went out to a restaurant somewhere, which I'm not just sure where it was, but I'm told the conversation went on into the early mornings, and they don't even remember what restaurant they were in themselves. They were totally smitten with each other, and that led to an immediate arrangement from around back in Sydney, and 25 years as a soulmate. So that was lovely. Suzie also, on all the overseas trips, she was running a business in Sydney, but she was able to, on the computer and the telephone, support Brian in his activities, but also run her business, which is to be commendable. So that's just about covers the rowing side of things, but you all know that Brian was a very keen footballer, a Collingwood supporter, and he in 1989 and 1990 was conditioning coach with Collingwood under Lee Matthews, highly regarded, and it's fortunate that I'm also a Collingwood supporter, and David Pincus, who's here somewhere in a bright jacket, he used to provide his company's corporate box for Brian and myself and others on the Richmond Collingwood clashes. And we were mostly quiet, reserved, and didn't do much damage at all, but it was a great experience every time we were there. Thank you, David. I just have to finish really by saying Brian was a very affable and beautiful man. We used to try and pass him off as John Newcomb in the early days with a moustache. We didn't get very far. I remember once we were in a plane talking to the hosties, who's that over there? And they said, no, that's not him. We would have been told if it was. So that didn't work for us very well. Anyway, to Brian, he's a wonderful, affable man, and we had a lot of fun. Cheers.
Thanks, Kerry. In 1979, where's Noel? We were training for the King's Cup, and unfortunately Michael Nicholson fell ill with glandular fever, and so in jumped a young, fresh-faced Noel Donaldson. At the 750 metre mark to go, Noel yelled out, because the World Championships were in Bled, Yugoslavia. He said, "Let's plead for Bled, let's plead for Bled." And we took 2/3 of the length off South Australia, and I'll leave you, Noel, to bring the crew home.
Thank you, James, and we all know what happened at the end of the race, don't we? In fact, the photos celebrating tonight's event and that sort of thing is that 1979 King's Cup with Brian hanging it up, and I'll get to that through a few minutes speaking to you. It's a great pleasure. Thank you, Suzie and Jim, for asking me to do this. I feel extremely humbled. In one sense, Stringy, you should probably be here. He was the better coxswain of the two of us, but I'm here. I've got the microphone. On this anniversary day, 12 months ago, it's a great opportunity to celebrate Brian's life. A few months ago, I had the honour to speak at the front of Mercantile Rowing Club in christening the boat with other people, John Bertrand, Will Bailey. We all spoke on behalf there. I must have done a good job that night for Suzie to think that was okay, and she's pretty good on the end of a hammer, so just watch out if you see her later tonight with a hammer in her hand. At that time, I reflected on Brian's rowing career from school at PAC to Adelaide Uni, South Australia, Victoria, Australia, that has already been spoken about. I'll repeat a little bit of that, but I'll add a little more. There have been many parallels in both Brian and my lives in our rowing careers. He was a much better sportsman than I was, but since then we follow one another, certainly through the coaching sphere a lot in terms of what we've actually done. So in one sense, Brian was like a big brother, your father, or the astute person that you always looked to when you needed some. Not to think that we didn't take the piss out of him on many occasions as well. I'll get to a couple of examples of that. I was very glad to follow in his footsteps. As we know, Richo had 8 warm-up years in SA, 4 warm-up years in Victoria, before the 13th was a lucky number. There's a few guys, Alex Sloan, Jimmy, Tim's here somewhere. There's enough of us here. And some little fella must have steered the boat straight to get it over the line. So thanks to all those guys for getting that campaign going and bringing the King's Cup back to where it belongs. And thanks to Brian coaching a number of them. I was lucky to follow in his footsteps there as well. We won a few more. We've certainly had the best of it. So I think John Bolby and other New South Welshmen are in the room. Just if we go back, we can probably say that we've got the upper hand at the moment. That really became the beginning of a lifetime together. Sitting face to face with Richo in an 8 was an education, particularly as he could do it on either side of the boat. Can't be forgotten. Wasn't great sculler, mind you, but a very good bow sort of stroke side oarsman. What I was astounded by at times and learned a lot by him is that he knew exactly what was going on behind him when he was stroking the boat. There's Bill in the front row too. Bill was actually the main instigator of that 79 win, sitting in the middle of the boat. But Brian knew what was actually happening behind us. And I wondered how I could sit there in the coxswain seat thinking I knew what to do and having the stroke tell me that he wanted something to happen and identifying an oarsman that wasn't doing the right thing. And another member of that crew was Andrew Withers. So he used to say, "Tell 4 to sit still." And I always wondered why he knew it was 4. I asked him one day, he said, because it was Andrew. And they rowed together in coxless boats, so he knew all about what was happening in the 4 seat. Not to mention the day in the Aussie 8 with poor old Andrew. We rowed up the gorge and we kept telling Andrew to sit still, sit still, sit still. Andrew wouldn't sit still, and then finally, after about 7 Ks, he looked down and said, "Oh, you bastards, someone's turned my seat around." We'd got about 7K up the gorge before. So once he turned it round, we got off his case. It was just a little in-house joke at that stage. But learning from Richo was something that I took to all through my rowing career in one sense. What he taught me face to face, in alongside peers, was something I'd always remember. And I was only a young coxswain at the time, and I think through his efforts, the way we worked together, that while we were walking to the course one day in Bled, Steve Newnham actually said to me, he said, "Mate, you finally made it. You've actually now done a good job." So, and I take a lot of thanks really to the crew, to Richo, and Chris Dane sort of through that to at least get Steve to give me some sort of acknowledgement. Not bad for a New South Welshman. Later on, Brian spent some time on some yacht race somewhere in the United States, but when he came back, we were fortunate enough that he became the main coach here at Mercantile Rowing Club. Sorry, Pants, you did say liven it up. I could say that he chose to be here, and that's when the King's Cup reign started at that particular stage. I'm now on the second page, so we're getting there. Brian left high performance coaching to go to commercial real estate before becoming the inaugural coach at the VIS in 1990. Maybe that's where Pepe Heyman got his like for real estate from, was how good a real estate that Richo actually was. I was pleased to be able to be one of the coaches within that program. And then in 1993, Brian took up the opportunity to be head coach in Canada and handed over the VIS reins to myself. If you've ever wanted to incur the wrath of Brian Richardson, you took the piss out of him, watched the eyebrow go up, and then hid somewhere knowing the big fella was annoyed. He didn't take it all that well, but we did take the opportunity of having a go at him every now and again. The Canadians couldn't quite pronounce Richo. It came out as Rico. Didn't we like to use that? And didn't Richo get pissed off in 1993 in Rachiche? Hey, Rico! He wasn't a happy man. After winning too many medals, he came back to Australia, and we'll rejoice tonight and thank that he did with the Sydney 8 silver medal and many other achievements in his leadership that Kerry alluded to towards the end there. And we've got a couple of the Sydney boys here tonight. I'm not sure if the Denmark stint was Richo's plan, but Suzie always looked like she was enjoying the Scandinavian lifestyle whenever I saw her in Europe. I don't think Richo was too worried about whether the Duns went too quick, but they were having a great time in that part of the world. They often say in life that you go out as you were born. I'm sort of getting to the stage of needing to wear nappies. But Brian wasn't quite like that. But it was great to see Brian back where it all began for him, coaching the boys at POC. I couldn't help but follow that lead back at Brian's old school, Melbourne Grammar School, next door, and doing some coaching of the schoolboys as well. So again, enjoying following very much in his footsteps. Richo went out, as we know, not all that healthy in these last couple of years, but giving back to the sport he loved, the chair of selectors of Rowing Australia, and we were on a pathway working group together with Hammer Fernandez, another member of the 2000 crew, a couple of years ago. That group is getting together on Wednesday this week, being reconvened. We'll miss Richo's sage advice and wise counsel. Hats off to a quiet but absolute huge personality and a huge influence in my life. Brian Richardson, rest in peace.
Good on Noel. Thanks for that. After Moscow in 1980, there was another sporting opportunity on the horizon. This came about for Brian and Will Bailey, racing 12-metre yachts on Port Phillip Bay. I call upon Will and John Bertrand, skipper of Australia, to tell us about Brian and his input to the campaign.
Last time I spoke in public, someone took a shot at me. Just explaining. I don't know if the microphone. I think we have to have the microphone for the live stream, so I'll do my best. It sounds like I'm in a TARDIS. I first met Richo in 1971, the King's Cup in Perth. I was just 19 years old. I was sitting in the 6th seat of the Victorian 8. Richo was in the 7 seat of the South Australian boat. Very fast crew. He's a couple of years older than me. In the final, as Kerry mentioned, we came from behind and we had an absolute ding-dong battle over the last 400 metres with a desperate sprint. Over the last couple of 100 metres, we managed to win by a third of a length. It was a pretty good time for the days. It was 5:50 something, I think, which was not bad, but we had to work for that. I rode King's Cup again for the next 2 years against Richo, and that's when he saw the light and moved to Victoria. So it was my privilege to row in with him at Monash and to be in the same rowing team as him for the World Championships in 1978. We were in 2 different fours. I'm going to try and explain how we got involved with America's Cup. Richo and I were recruited from the riverbank by Barry Scott, who was the president of the Victorian Yachting Council. I had met Barry before, and his son Martin, who's now a KC, he was a young coxswain in a crew I was coaching. Neither Richo or I knew that the other had been approached also. And Barry teed up interviews for us with John Bertrand at his sail loft in St Kilda. And we were both invited to go to Perth for trials at different times. Rowers getting involved in America's Cup was not unprecedented. I knew of Con Findlay, who was the gold medal in Melbourne in the coxed pair. He won the gold medal for the coxed pair again in Tokyo, 1964. He was a very big bloke, as you have to be, to row the tow truck. And he had a third Olympics in Montreal, which is, 12 years later, I think. But he wasn't rowing. He sailed the Tempest class with Dennis Connor and won a bronze medal. And that was the start of his sailing career. He sailed on with Dennis Connor and he won 2 America's Cups, 1974 with Ted Hood and 1977 with Ted Turner. When we were in Newport for that long summer in 1983, Richo and I shared a room at Founders Hall, which was our crew home in Newport. We talked a lot when we weren't on the boat, and we planned and we did our best to lift the physical standards of the crew, and we took pride in helping create the conditioning program that we undertook, and it worked really well. Everyone enjoyed it. We got fit, and we were happy. Richo and I tried to improve our own performance on the handles and on the foredeck as well. We worked hard on the shore. The grinders generally worked in the sail loft. We moved sails from the boat to the loft every day and back again in the morning. Hard work, but we absolutely loved it. And at night, before we went to sleep, which we did very quickly, we often spoke about what we might do the next day and how we were feeling. And I remember we devised a kind of an analogy, and we thought, if you were a fighter pilot in the Battle of Britain, remembering, of course, that the Battle of Britain was only 38 years before that, and actually more time has gone since we had that event. If you were that ace fighter pilot that we have sitting over here, you wanted to know that your Spitfire with its big Merlin, Rolls-Royce Merlin engine up the front was not going to miss a beat, that every time an input was made to the controls, that your aircraft would respond without delay and without mistakes. And we thought that that's the sort of attitude that we had to develop as grinders on the boat. We were responsible for producing the power that enabled our trimmers to shape the sails. And in a dogfight, if you were flying a Spitfire, you would have done just as many turns and twists as we did in the 10-minute pre-starts. They were very hard, very exciting, and great fun. And we wanted to make sure that we maximised the choices, the range of choices that the decision makers at the back end of the boat, John Bertrand, Hugh Trahan and Grant Simmer, could make. And it shouldn't matter how much they threw at you, you needed to respond like that Rolls-Royce Merlin. So Richo was an absolute warrior. He didn't have an off switch. He had no quit in him. And like elite rowers, and there's lots of you that I know today, we know what it is to be in a team, intimately in a team, and how to support each other, and that was very important in 1983. I valued Richo's friendship enormously. I miss him, and I will never forget him. So I'm going to ask John Bertrand if he'll come up, and he might make a few comments about Brian's contribution on our boat in 82 and 83.
Okay, nice job. G'day. Hello, Suzie. Right, so Richo. So Barry Scott, correct. It's actually a funny old microphone, isn't it? Yes, I called Barry Scott. I thought he was president. We'll try it. Okay. Testing 1, 2. Yeah, all right, that's better. Yeah, I looked up on ChatGPT yesterday, trying to figure out where Barry Scott fitted into the program. I thought he was actually president of Rowing Australia, but actually it turns out you're right. He was head of sailing Victoria, I guess, yeah. And the objective there is, I'd already competed in 3 America's Cups and 2 Olympics in the sailing. And you know, having been beaten badly by the Americans in the America's Cup, it was clear that we had to go to a much higher level than anything that had been done in this country before. And the question is to get high-performance athletes into the team. And you know, the sport of rowing, I've always admired how brutal the sport is, how tough it is. You know, I remember talking to James Tompkins after the 92 Olympics, and they were talking about moving into the red zone where they literally lose sight, but they're still conscious and they're still rowing. And I thought, you know, that's typical of the sport. I understood and respected that. So the objective was to get some high performance influence into the into our team, our sailing team. and hence the I said to Barry, I said, look, I want to meet up with the best performers in the country. Forget about which state. And the meeting was set up clearly with Richo and Will. And it was a big deal. It was a game changer for our organisation. There's no question about it. What both of them brought to the table was a sense of professionalism and a hardened attitude to high performance. And in the when Will talks about the grinders were much more than just putting power into these winches. There were a lot of other elements within the team requirement, going around the marks and sails going up and down and whatever, particularly when the heat was on, that they had to get right and they couldn't miss a beat. Otherwise, it was like a chain reaction. One mistake in the middle of the boat would just propagate throughout the boat, and the whole thing would come apart. So the teamwork was really, really important. And Richo, for example, he's just fantastic. He, he's a tough bastard, that's for sure. And we had another tough bastard on the foredeck, a guy called Peter Costello. He was in the Australian Army. We called him the Major, and he ran the foredeck. Everyone took very, very clear notice of what he was saying at any particular time. There was no confusion with the Major. And, part of that mafia was indeed Will. So it was Will, and there was Richo, and then there was the Major. And they came from a similar ilk. The Major came from military, special forces operations, which is like commandos and SAS. And there was Richo and Will coming out of this sport of rowing. And the summer was long. We were there for, I guess, 7 months. And we had effectively 4 days off in 7 months. So 7 days a week, no time off at all for 4 months, except for 4 days. And, it was a dedicated thing. The only way to look at it, we were at war with the Americans. The Americans, I've often said they're highly competitive people, as you well know, rowing against them, but they'll eat their grandmother if required. There's just no confusion on that. They'll eat their grandmother if required, particularly in the world of America's Cup, where no one had ever beaten these people since before the US Civil War. It's 132 years of domination. And the reason that they dominated is because they were very good at their craft. And so getting the sport of rowing involved was a very, very important step for us in terms of giving us more backbone and also lifting our standard of fitness, both physical and indeed mental as well, because the whole mental game was just as it turns out, just as important as the as the physical fitness. Richo, so I understand that his throwaway line was Recco in Denmark. Well, we used to call him Splash because he fell off the boat one day, and we recovered him. He didn't die, okay, and we called him Splash for splashing around in the ocean. So, but nevertheless, it was always respect. It was mainly Richo. It wasn't really Splash. I shouldn't denigrate the man, even though it's all about the fun. We also had what we call the red card, and a guy called, one of our guys, the deal is how do you smooth out the environment and how do you have fun over 4 months, living with each other, Founders Hall. It's just long. It was, there's just no time out, certainly no going back home, whatever. And so one of our boys generated the red card. So when someone lost their temper, you'd have to wear this card around your neck for a week with a smile on it, a red chunk of cardboard with a lanyard, and underneath it says, "Have a nice day," all right? Have a nice day. And I think, Will, you were a recipient. No, you weren't. Bullshit. Certainly Richo was, and I was, and other people were. And that's just part of the fun, to break the whole thing up, because, for God's sake, It was all, and it was good. It was very, very important. It broke the back of, the so-called seriousness of it all. Anyway, so bottom line is the big deal to get these boys of the sport of rowing into the team, and it was in that final. As you probably know, Will got a infected knee. He ended up in hospital. It was actually very serious, anyway, so Will was on the powerboat on our tender in the finals of the America's Cup. He was a very sick boy, just one of those bad luck things, the whole summer, and boom, something like that. And but anyway, Richo was on the boat, and this whole the final race. What are they? 47 tacks on one leg to the finishing line, all that stuff. These boys, they just never missed a beat. And the question is making the right decisions at the right time when it really counts. The right decisions at the right time. It's easier to say, it's hard to do, as you well know. It's like, talking to some of the boys last night, when these boats are in a rhythm. You call it a rhythm when the boats are in the flow? I get all that, I understand that. With a sailboat, you're doing the same sort of thing. We try and sail a boat like a fish. We don't understand how a fish can move through the water so fast with so little energy loss, particularly dolphins and porpoises. Even the best research coming out of the US Navy and so on, we do not understand that. And having a background in, I was chairman of Swimming Australia between London and the Tokyo Olympics, and we studied that whole area a lot. And but anyway, so when our boat was in rhythm with the environment, with the wind and the waves and so on, then you're on song, and the boat would sail almost by itself. And these boys, 11 guys on the boat, they had to be in sync with the whole thing. It wasn't just 11 guys on a boat. I remember reading the book, The Boys in the Boat, the US team, I guess, when would that have been? 1936? Just before the war, yeah. And, I was fascinated. It was one of the best books I've ever read, again, this boat in rhythm. And I fully understood that, and also the tension in that environment. Well, that's the sort of tension. Boys in a Boat was not unlike, our America's Cup project, where the whole thing, backs to the wall, against all the odds, all that stuff. And, again, having 11 people, and indeed our team was really 14 people in total. Just have these guys where you literally will die for each other. It's a big deal to say that, but it's true. And when it gets to that level where you just have this incredible empathy for each other and having each other's backs, and a good friend of mine was actually, he's just retired as Chief of Army, a guy called General Rick Burr, head of the SAS and NATO Special Forces, and anyway, he's just retired, and he said, we did the Kokoda track together quite a few years ago. I said, why are these boys did all this stuff, 18, 19-year-old kids, not trained properly? And he said at that stage, they pull their boots off, the skin would come off in their boots, they put their boots back on, they go back in the front line, unbelievable sacrifices, you just cannot comprehend it. And he said at that stage, it's not the flag, it's not the Australian flag, it's not the family back home, it's actually your mates in the trenches. It's your mates in the trenches. And that's exactly, you folks know that, when an 8 goes beautifully, or a 4 or whatever, and you're on song with the environment, but most importantly on song with each other, then it's just another world. It's just unbelievable. And we had that with the Australia 2 team. It was about the performance that was really quite unique. We're ahead of the game, and these boys and the sport of rowing was an integral part of it. So it's great. I continued on a relationship with both these boys after the '83 America's Cup, and I was lucky to be a mentor for some of the teams at the 2000 Olympics with Dawn Fraser and Herb Elliott. And one of the sports I was assigned to, obviously sailing, but one of the sports I was assigned to was the sport of rowing. And it was just a thrill for me to, at one stage, with Richo, talk to the 8 before their finals at the Olympics in Homebush. And to see these guys, they're just so committed. Where did they finish? They get the silver, or was it? Yeah, and they were close. Was that much? A bee's dick. Jesus. What a bastard. And but anyway, that's that's sport, isn't it? It's a beautiful thing. Someone's first, someone's second. Anyway, it's a great pleasure to be hanging out with these guys, these champions, high performance athletes, high performance people, and a very, very important part of our of this thing called the America's Cup. Thanks very much, and thanks.
Thanks, Will and John. As John just mentioned, silver medal in the 8 in 2000. Please make welcome Alistair Gordon, 2-seat silver medalist.
Thanks, Jim. Suzie asked that someone from Richo's 2000 Olympic crew share some reflections from this chapter of his life. My name's Alistair Gordon. I'm privileged to share this part of Richo's enormous legacy when he coached me in the Australian Men's 8 in 1999 and 2000. From the crew here today, we've also got Stuart Welsh, who's younger, looks about 10 years older, with a silver hair. And while the other members are unable to be here, Suzie, they have passed on their best wishes for today and condolences to you and the family. First, I'd like to briefly reflect on Richo's immense contribution to Australian sport. He picked up the Australian Sports Medal for the best parts of 4 decades of service to the sport of rowing, enjoyed enormous success as an athlete, a coach, and a selector. He coached our 2000 Olympic 8 to a silver medal, which equalled the previous best performance by an Australian crew at the 1968 Mexico City Games. He was awarded an OAM for his contribution to sailing, an historic America's Cup win on the Australia 2. And if that wasn't enough, he also was the physical conditioner for his beloved Collingwood Football Club in their 1990 grand final winning season. I'm sure he'd be loving the pious form coming into this week's prelims. What makes this legacy even more incredible is the manner in which O went about his craft. He was a mentor, he was softly spoken, respectful, calm no matter the circumstances, empathetic. He trusted his athletes, he provided space for opinion, and he was always a gentleman. The sentiment was also reflected by Rowing Canada, who described his leadership as gentle yet decisive, fostering camaraderie, trust, and respect. While Australian men's rowing enjoyed enormous success in smaller boats in the decade leading into the 2000 Olympics, you had to go back to 1984, the last time the men's 8 won a medal, the bronze. And not even Mike Mackay, the elder statesman from the 8, was around back then. Richo took the reins in '99 from Harold Yarling, bringing a very different personal style and approach. And there was little consistency in the 8 from 97 to 2000. The 2000 crew had the right mix of experience, a combination of 8 Olympic representations, and youthful enthusiasm that really lent itself to Richo's coaching style of empowering his athletes. At times, his hands-off approach was perhaps a little too relaxed. He enjoyed the odd unplanned sleep-in while we were out training. But this really reflected his trust in the athletes and empowering the crew to drive the program. Chasing gold, combined with the very strong personalities in the boat, understandably created some tense moments and memorable blow-ups. At one point, we also had to deal with the distraction of some potential crew changes very late in the piece. But true to form, Each time Richo dealt with these challenges in the same manner, always composed, always respectful, and always supporting his athletes, which kept us united and focused on the task ahead. In the build-up to the games, he also shared a brief glimpse into his sailing experience when he brought John in to speak to the team. John spoke about managing the hype around the games, focusing on what you can control, and not getting distracted by the noise of the moment. It was a skill which appears Richo adopted in life, and I suspect was one of the secrets behind his unshakable composure. Today, we honour a true gentleman of rowing and of life, whose leadership and friendship during and after rowing left an indelible mark on athletes across generations, including our 2000 Olympic crew. So please, to Richo.
Good on you, Alistair. Thanks very much for that. I now call on Tempe and Andrew to read sorry, just got a mental block, to share the tributes from Rowing Canada and Denmark.
Thanks. This is not the last time you'll see me up here this evening. My name's Tempe. For those of you who don't know me, I'm his stepdaughter. Very overwhelmed by all the kind things everybody says. Sorry, Mum, I knew I'd make you cry. Anyway, I'm about to say some more nice things about Brian. Rowing Canada, it's quite amazing listening to everyone tonight because they're basically saying what everybody has already said. So I'm going to take a liberty and paraphrase what they've said this evening. As we know, Brian's influence on the sport transcended borders, leaving a lasting impact on Canadian rowing through his distinguished career as both an elite athlete and world-class coach. He competed at the highest levels, from Victoria to Canada to Denmark. However, his legacy was cemented during his coaching career, which spanned over 2 decades. And he was instrumental in shaping the future of rowing both in Canada and Australia. He was personable and outgoing who brought a wealth of skills and experiences to his role as head coach of Rowing Canada. Sorry. I know. From 1993 to 1996, his leadership saw the team achieve multiple world championships, culminating in 6 medals at the 1996 Atlanta Olympics. During his second tenure as head coach from 2001 to 2004, he worked alongside an accomplished coaching team, including Mike Spracklin, Al Morrow, Volker Nolte, Howie Campbell, Katie Burke and Terry Paul. While head coach, he was also lead coach to the women's lightweight double, and from 1993 to 1996 directly coached athletes such as Michelle Darville, Derek Porter and Silken Lawman. A perceptive observer of individual characters, Brian took the time to truly know and understand relationships, actively promoting an atmosphere of camaraderie among his talented coaching team. Both on and off the water, he fostered an environment of mutual respect and trust. His legacy will live on through the countless athletes, coaches and colleagues whose lives he touched and throughout his illustrious career.
Hi everyone, my name's Andrew Duncan. I am his stepson-in-law, I guess, and an avid pies man, and we were very, very tight. This is from the Danish rowers. Brian Richardson, great footprints. Brian left some great footprints on Danish rowing and in our hearts, footprints that are impossible to fill. Brian once told me his first impression of the Danish rowers were they were rude, until he realised that it was lost in translation. English is very different to Danish. For example, we don't have a direct equivalent for the word please. Perhaps, and I'm about to butcher this by the way, I don't speak any Danish, perhaps that can seem rude, but instead we have who. Nailed it. Strong and kind, Brian was dedicated and powerful, and he taught us so much. But he was also hyggelig. It was also possible to have a great conversation over cups of coffee, cold beers, glasses of red wine, or a whiskey. Always interesting conversations. He even impressed the Danish king at the Olympics in Brazil, Frederick. The crown prince at the time visited our hotel in Rio. We had one of those great conversations, Brian, Frederick, and the team. The Crown Prince Frederick and his family had just visited Australia and the Sailing Museum, and he remembered the statue of a strong man grinding for the America's Cup winning team. It might have been Will. A great coach, Brian always saw the athletes. He always was trying to get the best out of us. He knew there could be many paths to the goal, and we made plans together. He saw us for who we are. Two important lessons out of many others we in the team have learned from Brian. First, don't talk yourself into it. If you say you're tired, you'll feel tired. Whatever you focus on, you'll get more of. I still use that a lot. I tell myself and my kids, don't talk yourself into it. And excuse me, sending a smile and thoughts to Brian. Second, always look on the bright side. That was Brian's point of view. If we from Denmark could sing a song for Brian tonight, it would be always look on the bright side from Life of Brian. But it should be The Best by Tina Turner. Brian, you simply are the best. On behalf of the whole rowing team for Denmark, especially the men's and women's light team, Julianne.
Thanks, Tempe and Andrew. Brian had many friends outside rowing and sailing. I call on them Gary Richardson, no relation. Brian's little brother, to tell him about his big brother.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the honour of coming tonight. I'm going to disappoint everyone, because I'm not going to say anything nice about Brian at all. I first met Brian in 1982, and the thing that struck me most about him was that I liked him, despite the fact that he was a Collingwood supporter. And I did check at the time he had all his teeth as well. So I met Brian after I graduated medicine and moved into an infamous house in Gore Street, Fitzroy. I was a fresh-faced medical intern, and I moved into a house that had quite unusual dynamics, and moved in with a mate of mine, and the two people that moved out were called Frosty and Paco, both of whom I've subsequently met but didn't know who they were at that time. The house was ruled by Jen Williams, now Cordner, and there were a few more Cordners in the house at the time, but there was this bloke that was always hanging around the house. Had a magnificent rig, even more magnificent moustache, and was always there at meal times, but never paid any rent. So I was quite perplexed by the whole experience, because it took a little while to work out who Brian was. So when we found out that we had nothing in common in sport, him being an elite athlete and me being at best a mediocre athlete, we had to look for common ground. And the common ground was drinking and talking shit. And I am world class at both of those. So Brian and I were elite And if there had been an Olympic program for those sports, we would have been on the podium every Olympics. So this house was notorious. It was a bacchanalian dream come true. And for people that don't understand the word bacchanalian, it means given to drunken revelry. So, in the words of Eric Burden, the great Eric Burden, and I apologise for the metre, there was a house in Fitzroy they called the Gore Street Fun. And it's been the ruin of many a poor boy, and Brian and I were both one. So, when we realised we had the same surname and we had the same interests in life, we became big brother and little brother. He was obviously big brother. I was little brother. I was a lot smaller than I am now, so that probably made it a lot easier to understand. And it was easy to love Big Brother because he had a fabulous nature. He was humble despite all the amazing things he'd done, and he loved to have fun. So we had many nights eating Mansfield lamb, which came from one of 8 million Cordners that lived in the country, drinking rough red white wine from Rutherglen, or wandering up to the Macedonian restaurant in Gertrude Street. It was a very different street back in those days. And drinking a million beers while eating mixed grill. And the thing that you guys may not realise as rowers, and I entirely respect you, but consider you, you know, maybe not as hard as you think you are, because apparently you guys only experience the red zone while you're rowing. On many of those nights, Brian and I experienced the black zone. We had many escapades together, and all of it was about having fun and drinking. And despite the fact that for a lot of our lives we were very far apart, I lived in the US for a number of years. We already know that Brian's lived Canada, Korea, Denmark, Sydney, South Australia. Whenever we saw each other, it was like we'd never been apart. And you only have a certain number of friends that are like that, that it's like a comfortable old shoe. As soon as you put it on, you feel like you've never taken it off. And we always really enjoyed seeing each other. And I think that's a sign of a true friend. So, most of you don't know me. I'm a cancer specialist, and this is the serious part. And the thing that I dread the most is when your mates call you for advice because they're sick. And when I got the call from Brian, and then found all his medical records and everything, I knew his prognosis was bad and that he was stuffed. Despite this, he fought valiantly and has always had amazing perseverance. Unfortunately, is often the case with this condition, both standard and experimental treatment failed. We visited, my wife and I, Ed and Jen, visited Suzie in Sydney shortly before his death. We spent a great day together talking about footy and other issues of not much importance. In the middle of the day, Brian was tired, so we went out for lunch, and Suzie paid for lunch with Brian's credit card, which is the first time Brian had ever paid anything for me. We went back to say goodbye, and at that point, we both knew we would never see each other again. My kids say I'm pretty hard because I use all my empathy up at work and never cry, but we hugged and wept, and it was one of the hardest things I've done. Brian passed away on the 15th of September. He has left an amazing legacy. Family, friends, apparently he was a reasonable rower. And I think it's a real privilege that I was lucky to know him. He even made me hate the pies a little bit less, only a little bit. I like to sum people up in a small number of words, and with Brian, the two things about him were strength and perseverance. He had great success. We miss him. We all miss him. We wish he was here to have a beer with us. Vale, big brother.
Thanks, Gary. It's now over to you, Suzie, Tempe, and Andrew.
Take two. I'm going to just say thank you on behalf of Mum for everyone here today, everyone who was so supportive, particularly while Brian was sick. As you know, it was quite a shock, and his passing happened too quickly. But everybody who knew and who was close to him dropped everything, flew across the country, across oceans to be there. We can't name everybody to thank you. We'd be here all evening. But we are extremely grateful, and I know Mum is particularly. She's been, you know, she often will forward me messages that people have sent her, overwhelmed with the support, but also that you continue to include her and to the way that you remember Brian to her. I know it's been a great comfort. Is that fair? And just on behalf of our family, you know, you all know him as the sports person, but at home he was very much the same. Kind, caring, gentle, always showing a very genuine interest in us kids, curious about our lives, supportive in everything that we did, and most importantly, devoted to Mum. The love he had for Mum is all we could have asked for in a stepfather. As you know, they lived all over the world. We weren't often there with them. It was incredible for us to witness the love that they shared, the respect, the loyalty, and how protective Brian was towards Mum. We admired that greatly. Knowing Mum that had a strong and steady man by her side gave us peace, and it was one of the greatest things to come into our lives 25 years ago. For those of you who don't know, I'm the eldest. It's my brother Hamish, who's in Portugal at the moment, and then we have a sister Annabelle who lives with Down syndrome, and she's non-verbal. Brian's love for Annabelle revealed another sign of him. He's extremely compassionate, extremely gentle, and it made it clear how much heart he had to give, although he wasn't keen on sharing his chocolate milk or Coke with her. As much as it hurts to think about not seeing him again, and it's a surprise that it has been a year already, we hold on to the happy times, the memories and the laughter that we shared, the travel that we got to do. I actually lived with Mum and Brian while I was at exchange in Denmark, and in a nice full circle moment, I actually received a scholarship from Princess Mary, as she was at the time, and she did remember Brian, and Mum came along with me to that ceremony. We feel incredibly blessed to have had him in our lives. My brother would like you all to know that he made him want to be a better man, and we miss him deeply, and we will always carry his example, his kindness and his love.
We now have 2 photo memories to share with you. minutes to go. Will, can you come up here, please? Andrew? We're going to give Brian traditional rowing farewell, calling his last 10 strokes. So if you could join with me as we count them down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Easy oar. Rest. Well rowed, Brian.
That signals the end of a watch at sea. So rest easy, Brian, from all of us.
As we all know, Brian was a very proud Collingwood man, and as one, I won't do this over the mic, but for those of you that are non-denominational football followers, please follow along, and Kerry, I'm expecting you to be in loud voice alongside me. I'll kick us off. Good old Collingwood forever, we know how to play the game. Side by side we stick together to uphold the Magpies' name. See the barrackers are shouting, as all barrackers should. Oh, the premiership's a cakewalk for the good old Collingwood.
Just lastly, before we end this evening, I'd like to thank Jim. Suzie, Jim and I met regularly over the last couple of months to prepare for this evening, but it would be remiss of me to not thank Jim, who pretty much has done this single-handedly. So Jim, thank you for bringing us all together. This is the end of the official proceedings tonight, and we hope you can stay and share your stories and the times that you spent with Brian. Thanks for coming.